All right, welcome everybody. Today we have a special guest in the office. We have Chuck Berendes. He is an attorney with Pittman and Pittman, and just going to go over a few questions and learn a little bit more about his practice. And so welcome. Thank you very much for coming in.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, so tell us a little bit about your education background, how you came to become an attorney.
Sure. So after I got out of college, I really didn't have a plan. And my girlfriend at the time, who's my wife now, was moving to San Diego. She had an older sister who was living there. And I thought, Southern California seems kind of cool. So I was going to get an apartment. And then a buddy wanted to go with me. So we got jobs. We'd been working construction. I'd been working through the summer, through college. And so we got jobs on this big construction site building a parking ramp with apartments on top. And they had just started. So we were like 2 stories in the ground. And after a couple weeks, they wanted to make me a foreman. And they hired, each day they hired a guy. So Monday a guy came, Tuesday a guy came, Wednesday a guy came. And it turns out all these guys, except one, but 4 of the 5 were within 6 months of my age. So like 22 years old, 23. And they were all like 3 days out of San Quentin prison. And so somehow they had found out I had gone to college, and my buddy must have told somebody. And so they would ask me about college and I would ask them about prison. And it was like our little cultural exchange. And when I was a kid, I had thought about being a lawyer and then kind of put that off to the side. And then after talking to these guys, that's kind of what really motivated me to. So I took the entrance exam in California and see if I could do it. And so by some stroke of luck, I did well enough on that exam. I was totally unprepared, but I did well enough that I was able to get into law school and went from there.
Nice, cool. I don't even know any of the terminology. So I know I've heard like green card, work visa, I've heard visa, residency, permanent residency. What are all of those terms?
Yeah, well, I mean, we could probably talk about this till like Monday, but I think the main thing, or some easy distinctions to think about, is so there's temporary visas. And then there's an immigrant visa, which is permanent residency, which is the same thing as a green card, and then citizenship or naturalization. So, if you come to the United States as a student, you'd have a student visa, which is temporary and related to your time studying. If you come as a visitor, you'd have a visitor visa, and it would be temporary, probably for a couple months, so you could visit family or see the Grand Canyon or whatever. There are lots of visas that are temporary, and they all have a letter assigned to them, but the letter is not helpful at all. So you'd think a fiancé visa would be an F, but a student visa is an F. So then the fiancé visa is a K. Like a visitor visa could be a V, but it's not. It's a B for boy. So it's this whole alphabet soup that is really not helpful at all. And really, I don't do any work with that because people are applying for those things in their home countries. And if they're a student, the university plays a role in that, or the high school. So then you have permanent resident status, so that'd be an immigrant visa because they'd be coming permanently to immigrate to the United States. And so there are a couple ways to get those. Generally, you have the family-based side, which is mostly what I do. So husbands petitioning for wives, or parents petitioning for children, or adult children petitioning for their parents. But then you also have the employment side. So some jobs are temporary, like, a construction company might need, more employees for a real temporary peak kind of, they just don't have enough workers for this big project. But after that's done, they're not going to need all of them. But other things are more permanent. Like companies are looking for an employee, a long-term employee that they just can't find, and so that's a whole nother ball of wax that I'm just sort of getting into now because there's all this protection for U.S. citizen employees. Mostly for employees, which is good. I mean, I don't think anybody would want a company, bringing in immigrant labor and excluding American workers. So that'd be bad for American workers. And it'd probably also be bad for the immigrant workers because they'd probably be not being paid as much and things like that. So you have to go through this whole process to demonstrate, we've advertised, we've been looking, and we can't find a person to do X job. And if the Department of Labor agrees with you that you've done the correct advertising and you've really looked and you really can't find anyone, then you could go and apply for somebody to permanently come work for your company. So I think the big things, there are all these temporary visas for visitors, students, athletes, fashion models, all this different stuff. Then you have green cards. And so then the question is, how do you get to the green card? Either through a family, through employment. In the news a lot, you'll hear about asylum. And then once you have a green card, then you're on a path to citizenship. But there are different requirements, how long you have to wait before you can apply. But yeah, the green card really, that's where, I guess, if you want to live in the United States permanently, that's the goal. And then from there, you can move to citizenship.
Okay, so you get issued a green card, and that is basically like you can stay here legally in the country while you're applying for citizenship.
So with the green card, which of course is a slang term, and the government was trying to get away from it. So for a while they weren't even green, but they can't shake it, okay. So they're green again now. And everybody says it. I mean, no one says a permanent resident card.
Okay, that helps me understand because I had no idea. That was my next question. Is a green card actually green?
It is again now mostly green, yeah. And it looks like a driver's license. It has your photo and date of birth. But it also says, when the card was issued and how long it's valid. So they're good for 10 years. So you could, I helped a lady 2 weeks ago. We were at the Immigration Homeland Security office in Minneapolis, and she became a citizen. She had been a permanent resident, so she had a green card for 71 years and became a citizen 2 weeks ago.
Wow.
So you could live in the United States permanently for decades and die, theoretically, with a green card. I don't meet a lot of people that do that. That 71 years is for sure the record. I see people sometimes who've renewed their card once, so now they've, been a permanent resident for 15 years, but they don't want to renew it again. It's kind of expensive, and I think most people, at a certain point, they want, America is now their home, and they want to be able to fully participate in that. So, yeah, with a green card, you can live and work in the United States permanently, and then after 5 years, you could become a citizen, go through that process.
And is the difference between a citizenship and having a green card is you get issued a Social Security number?
Social Security is linked more to employment. So you could pay taxes, really. Although, you could pay taxes with a individual tax identification number. So millions of people in America are paying taxes who don't have Social Security numbers. But if your visa type allows you to work, then Social Security will issue a Social Security number. So everybody, maybe there's an exception, I can't think of it, but everybody who becomes a citizen would have already had a Social Security number for a long time. The difference with citizenship, there's some stuff that, we could think of. You could vote, which is really important to people. Really, I think, at least in my experience, immigrants are really interested in that. The general public, maybe, I don't know what the stats are, but obviously not every American adult votes, right? But I think for immigrants, that's really, in my experience, something they're very interested in. Some government jobs, you have to be a citizen. The some sort of responsibilities of citizenship, be like serving on a jury, that sort of thing. And then I guess like kind of a pessimistic concept. You can't get deported once you're a citizen. So, I encourage my clients, even though I don't expect any of them to get in trouble in the future, I have had people come in off the street who had their green card for I can think of 2 individuals who had their green card for upwards of 30 years and then are convicted of kind of a low-level drug crime. And there's, well, what's going to happen to me? I'm like, well, you're going to get deported. And, that's a bad deal. You're 45 years old. You've been in the United States since you were 11 or something. I mean, I'm not saying that those actions are okay, but the consequences are pretty dramatic. So I think for just sort of worst case scenario, it's like, why don't you take care of your citizenship? And then if you get in trouble, you just go to jail like the rest of us and come back out, but you won't be deported. So I think protection from deportation, voting, those are the big things. Well, and then the U.S. passport. So then people could travel, and when they come back to the United States, they have a United States passport, and they don't have to go through the kind of rigorous questioning that can happen sometimes for non-citizens.
Gotcha. And I suppose there's probably a sense of pride when somebody goes from the green card to the United States citizen.
Oh, it's kind of amazing. There's a little ceremony generally at the office. Kind of Western Wisconsin goes to Minneapolis, and so that's where I end up most of the time. And usually the interviews are in the morning, and you have to go through your whole application. If you've been convicted of crimes or different immigration violations, those things could disqualify you. But of course, by that time, we would know that. And if my clients had those problems, we wouldn't be. I'm only going to apply if I think they're going to be approved. But anyway, you go through that whole thing. There's a civics test, so they take the test. There's a little English test, so you have to read and write and speak in English. And then if all that goes well, then in the afternoon there's a ceremony, and there's usually like 45 individuals who naturalize, and it's pretty moving. I mean, you see people from all over, and they call out the countries, and when your country's called, you stand up, and usually, out of 45 people, there's probably 20 some countries. So you see people from all over the world, and men and women, young people, old people. And I mean, the thing that I know is no matter how they got to that point, even in the easiest case, if you were some high-level employee from Scandinavia or something, it's still, at the very least, is time-consuming and expensive. And for some other people who came as, like, let's say, refugees who've experienced, terrible situations, and then maybe never really had any plans of leaving their country, but something awful happened, and then they find themselves in the United States, and all of the struggles, a new language, a new culture, maybe now you're in Minneapolis and it's cold, and all these things. And then it's time consuming and expensive. So for everybody to get to that point, they've gone through a lot. And so there's a very real sense of accomplishment and pride and optimism to now I'm a U.S. citizen. It's pretty moving every time. And I've been there a lot of times. And every time, I don't think I'm an overly emotional guy, but every time I get goosebumps. Like, this is a huge day for these folks.
That is amazing. Do you remember the first time?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, I can tell you that the first time we went into this room, and I was sort of disappointed because I thought it wasn't very special. It's just like a kind of a corporate, like a big room in an office building. Not like a courthouse or obviously a church wouldn't be a good setting, but if like a big event, sometimes you have these grand like surroundings. And I thought, oh, this is just so drab, and everybody's kind of crammed in here. And I thought, this is kind of a downer, But then as it started unfolding and you could see no one cared about that. They were just probably reflecting on everything that, people are tearful and their families are tearful and there's so much emotion. And so, yeah, that's probably, I don't remember what client it was, but I do remember that feeling. And then also thinking like, yeah, that doesn't matter. We could be standing on a street corner, I think, and if people were administered the oath to become a citizen, it would be as meaningful as anywhere else.
Nice. So you work with a lot of people from different cultural backgrounds, different countries, and life experiences. What's it like working with people from different backgrounds?
Yeah, so I was thinking about this the other day. I gave a little talk about immigration to the local bar association. And one of the things that I highlighted was within probably 6 months of me I know for a fact, within 6 months of me starting 15, 16 years ago, I saw somebody from each continent here in La Crosse. And then it was maybe my second year, I thought, well, I should start a list of where everybody's coming from. And that list is seriously dozens and dozens of countries. Now, there are some that are more common than others, but I've seen people from all over the place. So, I think probably the one thing is I've gotten pretty good at listening and understanding people who have maybe really strong accents. I've also learned how to work with interpreters, which maybe seems kind of easy, but there's a little skill to taking your time and asking clarifying questions and things like that. But I would say, and this isn't really the question that you asked, but somehow this was triggered in my mind. I've seen people from Africa, Southeast Asia, Western Europe, Canada, all over the globe. And I think the thing that I see in common with all of my clients is that they're courageous people who are willing to take risks to make things better for themselves and their families. Almost no one that I meet, like when they were 8 years old, thought, I'm going to move to the United States. I think almost all my clients would prefer if they could have remained in their hometown with their mom and their dad and their uncles and aunts and speak the language and understand the cultural traditions and the food and the music and everything. But something pushed them, either tragedy or expertise in some field or love, but they took the risk to leave all that behind and come somewhere where they didn't know anything because they thought that they could do it, that they could do better in the United States. And not everybody does that. Their brothers and sisters stayed there. Their mom and their dad stayed there. I think Americans think sometimes like coming to the United States is everybody's goal. It's obviously so much better in so many ways. And yeah, the United States provides a lot of opportunity, but it's incorrect to think that people don't sacrifice to come to the United States. I mean, being separated from your family alone is a sacrifice. So the people who do that, regardless if they're from Asia, Africa, Europe, South America, it doesn't matter. They're like courageous people who are willing to take risks for their betterment and the betterment of their family. And I've been really inspired by a lot of stories.
That's a perspective that I don't think I've really ever thought of. If I imagine what it would take to move myself or my family to a complete other country that has a different language and different culture and is food, everything is is different. I've never really thought of it in those terms. It is, you're right, quite courageous to take on that experience.
So the one story that's really stands out to me in that vein is 10 years ago, I was talking to this woman. She was 26 years old. We were in Sparta, and she's tiny. I mean, she was probably, I don't know, like 4'10". 26 years old. She's from Central America. And I said, what brought you to Sparta? And she said, oh, I knew somebody. They called me and they said there was a job. If I could get here, there was a job. I said, well, how long did it take you to get here? She said about 6 months. I said, well, that seems like a really long time. She said, well, I had to walk to Texas. So she walked through several Central American countries, all the way through Mexico to cross into Texas, and then paid somebody to drive her to Wisconsin. And I'm like, how many employers do you think, like, hey, I got somebody who's willing to walk 2,000 miles to come to your job. Would you like an employee like that? Like, okay.
That is phenomenal.
Yeah. So I thought of this early on too. You know, there's not like 9-year-old girls in Honduras who are like, someday I'm going to grow up and I'm going to live in Arcadia, Wisconsin. That nobody thinks that. But then there's an opportunity and some people seize it. And now the reality is whether or not those people have visas, I mean, that's a whole different discussion. But I had to walk to Texas. I mean, that's pretty incredible.
That's very, it's inspiring and it's eye-opening as to the length of what relocating might mean to somebody. So you also do a lot of volunteer and work in the community. What are some of the things that you do outside of your law practice? Yeah,
so I've been, I guess it's like lucky to be involved in some cool projects. So I'm a part of a number of boards in town. So Beer Right Bike Brigade, Shelter Development, which is an organization that maybe people are familiar with, the Exchange, which is a furniture bank on 4th Street across from the brewery. Like each year, hundreds, I think we're in the 400s kind of on average now, families are getting furniture for an apartment, you know, as they're coming out of some sort of transition. Probably certainly moving from a rougher spot to a little bit of a better spot. But also Shelter Development owns a couple houses that we've been able to over time purchase homes, get families in the homes, and then we've been able to sell those homes to the families and kind of do all this at a little bit of a below market rent and help people kind of get on their feet. And then it's not like a competitive bidding process for the home. So, but then we can use that money to turn around and buy another house.
How does the furniture bank work? Do people from the community bring the unwanted furniture in? And
yeah, so logistically, that's all kind of a big deal, right? Moving couches and chairs and stuff. So there's 70 plus volunteers involved with the Exchange. Let's say a couple is downsizing or a spouse passes away and the living spouse is going to move somewhere else. And now you have all these rooms full of furniture. The Exchange has a trailer and volunteers will go out and pick stuff up. And then for the family that will benefit, just because, again, it's primarily volunteer run, you have to be working with another agency in La Crosse County. And so that caseworker would contact the Exchange and say, hey, I'm with Mary Smith. You know, can we set up a time on Tuesday to come down? And so then, you know, set up a time and walk through. And there's kind of some parameters about how many bedrooms and whatever. And then volunteers will deliver it to the new apartment. So the one thing we've been pretty lucky about, and one thing I worry about a lot, is that it'll just be some informal dumping ground for junk furniture. Fortunately, that hasn't happened very much, but here and there, somebody thinks it's a cool idea to like leave a couch on a Tuesday night, and then it gets rained on, and now we have to dispose of a couch.
Oh, no.
So don't do that. Just call, and the volunteers will come get it. Midwest Music Fest, we work on together, so that's another. The shelter development's great, but it's kind of serious housing issues and stuff. I've enjoyed Midwest Music Fest because like we're gonna plan a concert series, like that'll be fun. Lacrosse Soup is another organization that I'm a part of. So the next event will be coming up in April on the 27th, I think, at the Capella Performing Arts Center on 8th and King. So there'll be 4 local organizations who make a pitch to the crowd that, hey, we need a little money to do this project. And then the crowd votes on the one that they think is best, and then that organization takes home all the money that was collected that night. I'm probably forgetting. I'm involved in a couple little projects in town. I may be skipping some right now.
Nice. It sounds like volunteering your time is important, and I think that's excellent. That's a great way to share your resources and knowledge. And like you mentioned, we're on the Midwest Music Fest board together, and it's so interesting to see the inner workings of how a festival is put together, and
Yeah, absolutely.
working with all the different types of bands and venues, and that's quite an orchestra.
Yeah, for sure. And I think with a nonprofit, or I suppose any organization, you probably start with kind of a simple idea. And as you experience success, the downside is it becomes a lot more complicated. So like booking a band with an opening act, maybe that's not that big of a deal, but now you're going to try to book dozens of bands at half a dozen venues over a couple days, and all that goes into that. Or, the exchange. Oh, maybe we could gather a little furniture and help some people, maybe victims of domestic violence, or, people experiencing housing insecurity. And then all of a sudden you're helping like 400 families a year. And it's just like, how do we do this? Now we have 2 covered trailers and 75 volunteers. And so, yeah, the more success your idea has or your organization has, like the complexity seems to like ramp up a little bit too.
Nice. So I prepared some questions for you, and this is kind of like a lightning round.
Oh yeah,
per se. So I'm gonna just to get to know you a little bit better. Are you a coffee or a tea drinker?
Beer.
Okay. If you had to listen to only one song for the rest of your life, what would it be?
So I was thinking about this. It would have to be probably something from Led Zeppelin, because it could be like 11 minutes long. No like Pixie song, 90 seconds in and out, because if we had to do this a whole bunch of times. So I said, In My Time of Dying, Led Zeppelin.
Perfect. Good choice. What's the most spontaneous thing you've ever done?
When I was in 8th grade, I think, I had a basketball coach. We were going into a tournament, and he was speaking hyperbolically. He's like, I want you guys mean. I want you shaved heads. I want you smelling like garlic. We're going to go in there. And so I went home and shaved my own head. Halfway through, the clipper thing broke. So now I'm like cutting my hair as close as I can with the scissors. My parents showed up to the game, and it probably looked like I was going through some like medical experiment. We won though. I ate some garlic too.
That is good advice. Is that sort of advice, that same sort of...
It worked that day, I guess.
Anything that it's helped in the future?
I let my hair grow back. It didn't work out great.
One thing on your bucket list.
I want to go to a major college football game in the South. I think it'd be crazy. Like women in dresses and, I don't know, cocktail parties. I don't know what they're doing. It'd be a whole different deal.
Well, biggest fear?
Heights. Easy.
Really?
Oh, man. Yeah, I've done a couple roofing jobs, and it's like the worst experience of my life. The worst. I feel like I'm going to die the whole time. It doesn't get better at all. It's the worst. I wish I could shake it.
I can relate. So as you're growing taller, was there any point where you're like,
it's just starting to
just
get dizzy? Yeah, no, not quite.
Okay. What's one thing you wish you could tell your younger self?
Ask more questions. I definitely learned that more as a professional. I thought that it was maybe exposed you or something, or showed some sort of weakness if you're asking questions. But the world is way too complicated. Like, nobody knows everything. Nobody knows even close to, so the more questions you can ask people who know things about what you want to know, the better off you'll be. And I think that's true while you're going through your education, when you're in the professional world, or any sphere, any work, like, ask more questions.
What's your favorite dance move?
I think the only dance move I could pull off even passably is the polka.
The polka.
Yeah, yeah. Maybe when I was younger, high school days, I stood a chance. Not anymore. I got to keep it in my lane.
Did you learn square dancing in elementary school?
Well, I wouldn't say I learned it. They tried to impart that wisdom on us. But yeah, I couldn't do it now.
It dawned on me the other day that I know how to square dance because I learned it I couldn't win a competition.
Yeah.
But I was walking through the kitchen and I stopped and I thought, why do I know how to square dance?
The better question is, why don't the rest of us? There's lots of room in our brains. It's not like, if I learn how to square dance, I'm going to have to push something else out.
Right.
We could just learn a little more.
Like push the Running Man, for instance. That's gone.
Gone. I just think athletically, maybe I could get the Running Man going again. My wife could do it for sure. Yeah.
What's one problem in the world you'd like to solve, and how would you solve it?
I saw this list of questions before I came in here. I feel like not very well equipped to solve world problems. I think one thing, like one big problem or issue, or controversy that I think I could help with. Immigration, obviously we talked about earlier, that's kind of my expertise, but always seems to be really controversial in America. And we don't do anything about it. So the system really hasn't changed. We don't link the rules to the needs of the market, for example. And I think we could do a much better job of saying, we need more agricultural workers. Okay, well, let's make a process to do that. Or we need more workers in hospitality and tourism. Okay. And we keep, as a nation, statistics on all this stuff. So then in 3 years, if we need less agricultural workers, like, we could respond to that. But we don't really do any of that right now. That's one big problem that I think I maybe could play a role in. There's lots of things that I would like to change, but then I don't really know how to do it. So that's the only one I could come up with.
Cool. That's definitely, I feel like, a little bit of a case of maybe the general public not knowing a whole lot. And I think I can relate that situation to a lot of different situations in life. Is you just don't know enough about something, so it's easy to have a certain thought or a thought pattern about something. And maybe the American general public would, if they knew really what some of the issues and problems and situations are, would be a lot more open-minded.
Well, I think, that the immigration topic makes me worry a little bit about other topics, because when I see on the news stories about immigration, I can tell if it's accurate or not accurate. And I can tell sometimes where they're trying to be accurate, but it's not quite right. And then it makes me think about all this other stuff that I don't know that much about. And the same thing is probably happening. Like, there are factors that maybe it's just too complicated to explain in a 90-second spot on the news. So it's kind of getting left out, but you don't know that because you don't know that much about it. You and I were talking earlier about national trends in real estate, local trends in real estate. Like, regular people walking around don't That's not their expertise, so they don't know that. So, I mean, I guess maybe that goes back to like ask people questions who do know things about the topic that you're interested in. But yeah, the world is kind of a complicated place. And I think the more you can learn about things that you're interested in, the more it'll start to make sense.
Perfect analogy. A lot of great and interesting information about the topic of immigration. One of the other areas, or I guess two of the other areas that you specialize in is estate planning and also real estate. So do you usually work closely with real estate agents? Is there situations where you have to work closely alongside a real estate agent on a complicated matter?
So there definitely have been some times where I couldn't have moved forward with some issues for clients without the assistance of an agent. I was thinking about one where there was a question about an inheritance where two siblings, their parents left them the farm in equal shares. And they're like, well, what does that mean? You can't, it's not like a piece of paper. You just fold it in half and now it's 50-50, right? So I did reach out to an agent who I knew had expertise in kind of rural land, hunting land, ag land. And he was able to provide like a really helpful map that, okay, this pasture is worth more or less this amount of money. This hillside is worth this amount of money. This kind of like creek bottom is probably worth about this much. Here, the farmstead with the buildings is probably worth about this much. So every acre on the farm wasn't worth the same in the market. So it wasn't so simple just to, like I said, draw a line down the middle. Like there's your half. Well, that wouldn't be fair. So working with an agent to figure out the value of that complex kind of piece of property was a huge benefit to my client in being able to sort that out.
So a complicated situation, you request an expert to make things simple and keep the peace amongst the...
Well, yeah, I mean, and I think without that, it's like sort of speculation. Well, and maybe it's not even speculation. I mean, I think one of the two siblings had somewhat of an idea, that this parcel is worth more than that one that floods all the time, or like this really steep hillside, although there's like trees that are valuable there. But to have an expert say, hey, this is what it's worth. Now, I mean, you know that. I mean, is that 100% rock solid information? I mean, no. You still have to live in the market and what are people going to pay for it? But it was backed by his experience, backed by other data. I mean, the maps were very accurate, so it provided the information that was required. With that information, they could move forward. Without that information, it was sort of just like lingering sort of distrust or kind of anxiety of like what he's going to get the better part, or something like that. So once they had that information, they could move forward.
Excellent. That brings up a really good point. And I always feel in our business, you can work with an agent who is limited in knowledge or resources, and you can work with an agent in a real estate transaction that has a lot of information, creative ways of looking at things, and just overall general knowledge. So it's great to hear that you were able to utilize the expertise of an agent to smooth over a very complicated process.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you ever have a scenario where you would advise a client of yours to use a real estate agent?
Absolutely. And I certainly have done that. I tell my even clients who come in to talk with me for the first time about immigration, sometimes they'll ask me, do I need an immigration attorney? I said, well, there's no law that says you need one. And I mean, all the information pretty much about anything is on the internet, right? So I'm like, I have no doubt that if you wanted to invest the time and energy required to sift through the good and bad information that's on the internet, read the rules, read the government sites, figure out what's what, could you like get a green card for your wife? Like, yeah, I think you could probably do that. But do you want to do that? I mean, I wouldn't want to become an expert on something to do it one time. It seems like a waste. I think the same is true in real estate, right? Like some people are pretty savvy and they're not afraid of business transactions or reading contracts or doing some research to figure out how much something's worth. Okay, that's great. Like, go for it. But I think for the most part, people don't know. Like, how much is my house worth? I paid this much for it 18 years ago. How much is it worth now? How am I going to figure that out? Well, I know my friend sold their house. Well, yeah, that was 3 years ago and they live, a mile and a half from here. I mean, just valuation is a skill or a piece of evidence, a piece of data that probably people in the general public aren't super qualified. And better than people walking around on the street. If you get that wrong, either this is kind of your chance. Either you're going to lose money that you could have made, or you're going to price it too high and scare people off. So, I mean, getting that right is really important. And then the other thing is, how do you get the word out? Let's just, you're a regular person trying to sell your regular house. Like, how do people know that? Like, you're seriously going to pound a sign in the front yard that says for sale? I mean, you're going to miss a ton of opportunities. So the marketing and I think the valuation and the marketing are two huge pieces that and then not to mention the actual nuts and bolts of the transaction. Like, how many pages is that contract? I mean, I don't know. I can't remember, but 8-10 pages long. Yeah. Like, do regular people are intimidated by that? And in some ways you probably should be. Like, you should understand what's in the contract. So are there people out there that could do this successfully without a real estate agent? Yeah, there are. Are there people who should not do this without some professional assistance? Yes. Some people, probably most people, would be much better served to like give a little bit of money so that somebody can help you, with this complex transaction.
Yeah, that's a great point. I've seen before, sometimes in real estate, the situation occurs where somebody passes away and the children have to figure out, the process of not only going through probate, if that's the case, but getting ready to sell the house. And both of those scenarios are very closely tied together and very important. We've definitely seen people do that without an attorney and without a real estate agent. But it can lead to very stressful scenarios because, like myself as an agent, I'm constantly looking at the trends, not only in marketing, but the trends in pricing, different strategies. It is an animal that you have to be in tune with.
Yeah, absolutely. I just remember like when my wife and I were looking to buy our house, turning to my dad and turning to her dad, and then realizing they hadn't bought a house in 30 years. So, and they both said, I have no idea what to tell you, So, yeah, of course, all that stuff is evolving. And sometimes it's evolving really fast, right? I mean, sometimes the market changes. I mean, probably not day to day, but where was it this time last year could be very different. And somebody going to work in a totally different field doesn't know that. And so, yeah, it just seems like, and then you mention, the death of a parent or something. And then you have all the emotion on top of it. And so, yeah, I think that the insight of an agent in those cases, and as an attorney, there's some places I think that I can help that an agent might not feel as comfortable, but I'm certainly not going to tell you how much I think your house is worth. I mean, there's no way.
Right. And oftentimes we get asked, as a real estate agent, how do I proceed with this process? And by default, I'm usually, contact your attorney, or an attorney that specializes in estate planning, such as yourself. I've got a couple questions for you on that
Sure.
that I've always kind of wondered. If you could explain to somebody that's just completely unfamiliar with that process, what would you describe that process being like?
Well, so I think the biggest thing is you're trying to be a little proactive and make some decisions about your assets, right? And now I will say, there are some people in town who are way better at dealing with people with like a lot of assets or complex, family businesses and all that sort of tax consequences that can come with different choices there. I mean, the people that I'm working with are kind of regular folks who own a house and maybe have some kids, but you're just trying to be proactive. What do you want to happen with the stuff that you have? And there's different ways to address those things. If you have a life insurance policy as a beneficiary on it, you can add different instructions even to bank accounts that it would transfer to somebody when you die. But then, people have personal items as well that maybe don't have a lot of money to the general public, but may have a lot of sentimental value in their family. And so how do you prevent disagreements between siblings? And I think if you can get out ahead of that stuff, it's better than leaving it ambiguous and then now it's an emotional time and people are trying to make these decisions or maybe are disagreeing about things. And so it's better to have some guidance, I think, as to, no, this is what mom wanted because it's written down.
Do you ever have scenarios where you may be working with other attorneys for, like, let's say different siblings have different attorneys where...
I haven't gotten it. I mean, that definitely exists, but I haven't gotten into that. This one that I was talking about with this farm, I think that was close, but it didn't end up going that way. But yeah, that certainly exists. I mean, you hear about, the musician Prince. I mean, they were working on his estate for, I don't even know. I think it's resolved now, but it was like years because it was huge and there wasn't anything written down. So now all people are making claims, and are these people, like, do they really have a claim, So the other thing, one of the partners at Pittman said to me early when I went there, he's like, look, you kind of got to make some decisions. You could pay a lawyer a ton of money to try to sort out all these different potential eventualities that you could imagine, or you could do nothing and then you could have this whole big probate problem, or you could just be kind of a little reasonable and try to just make a little plan, realizing that you can't imagine every outcome that may come in the future. So just try to be reasonable and say, this is what I would like to have happen. And that's probably what's going to happen.
Good advice. Can you share any tips for success in going to law school and starting a career as an attorney? Just went from first to fifth gear.
I love it. So there was a guy ahead of me. We went to the same college and we were friends in college. He was 2 years ahead of me. And then we were both out of college for 2 years before we went to law school. So when I started, he was still 2 years ahead of me. And he said, treat law school like a full-time job. Like, go there, be there by 8 o'clock in the morning and leave at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. And then that way you shouldn't have to do a bunch of stuff at night or on the weekends. You could just get it done. And so that's what I did, and that worked pretty well for me. I mean, maybe there's some people who like to do stuff all night long, but I didn't want to do that. And I think there's so many opportunities or different options for where an attorney is going to work. My career has been pretty atypical, I think. I started at Catholic Charities, and I worked there for 10 years. Then you and I worked in real estate for a while, and then now I'm at a small firm that I'm super happy about. I think the similarity, and you and I have talked about this for what I'm doing, what you're doing, is people need to know that we're doing these things. And so kind of the marketing and how do you balance out that with, I mean, you can't do that all the time. You got to do kind of your work too. But I think that's a big part of it. Just building up the practice so people know that I'm there, and time management. I think that's the other big one. Like you can't just talk to people on the phone all day. You have to produce the thing that they want you to produce. So I think time management's another big one too. And then I also will go back to, in the early part of my career, I didn't ask enough questions. There are resources in any field, but certainly in the legal field, of people that know a lot more than I do, especially when I was getting started. And I should have took advantage of that more. And now when questions come up that I don't know the answer to, I'm way less shy about asking somebody who I know is an expert in that field. I think there's way more potential clients in this community than I could ever help. And it's the same for any attorney. So they don't care if I have one client that they didn't get. They can't help them all anyway. So if I have a relationship with somebody, they're happy to give me a little advice. So I would say, starting out, ask questions, focus on how you're spending your time, and figure out in some way how to let people know that you exist.
Yeah. Would you say your profession is rewarding?
I really like what I do. I feel in the end, when we get, as we were talking about earlier, when we get to that naturalization day, many of my clients I've been with for years by the time we get to that point. And so it's meaningful for me to see that accomplishment. But even the steps along the way, it's very positive. The estate planning stuff is probably a little bit more day to day. I mean, how excited are you when you complete your will? I don't know. It's probably not a very memorable day, but still, I think people feel, I've been thinking about that for a long time. I'm glad I got that done. So it's nice to be able to help people solve some problems that they didn't know how to tackle on their own.
First of all, thanks for coming in and sharing a little bit more about your practice and experiences. It's been really informative and eye-opening in a lot of ways. I love that you have a lot of specific knowledge that I think is something that not everybody knows about. So thank you so much. Appreciate it. And looking forward to the summer coming up with the Beer by Bike Brigade.
Absolutely. No, thanks for having me in. This is super fun. I think what you're doing here is awesome, and I'm looking forward to see who you have in coming up. It's the reading your questions. I mean, I've been interviewed because I'm the only immigration attorney in town, and immigration is something that people are interested in, and so I've been asked questions about immigration over time, but this was an interesting list of questions, so it'll be cool to see who you're peppering with questions next.
Cool. Thanks again.
All right. Thanks, man.